in a few minutes, we're going to be talking sort of more about action planning and having time for you all to do some action planning of your own. But before we do that, we wanted to provide just like a couple of quick frameworks that we found helpful in thinking about some of this work. So the first one comes from a project called Learning in Places, which is led by Dr. Megan Bang. You can see her name down there on the bottom left. And she is an Indigenous researcher from Northwestern University. And some of us have been sort of engaged in this professional learning program with her and others on her team. And one of the frameworks that they have is the 7 dimensions, includes the 7 dimensions of ethical deliberation and decision making. Thanks, Libby, for putting that in the chat. And so it's one way or one model, one thing that we can use as we think about how do we move into actually making decisions based on data and evidence. And so I'm going to walk us through it, starting with number 1, which is, I guess, around 9 o'clock, if you see this as a clock. So how did the need to make this decision come to be? So this kind of gets at like, why is it even important to me, to my staff, to our students' families to make a decision about what we should or shouldn't do? Number 2, what values will guide your decisions? So our decisions are guided by our values. And so sometimes reflecting on what those are can be really illuminating. Number 3, how does the place you are or live impact this decision? And so this framework can really be used in a lot of ways. In one of the main ways that they present it in Learning in Places, this is actually something that you could use with students to sort of bring them through thinking about decisions about the places where they are. So should we make a pollinator garden in our schoolyard? Should we cut down the trees that are close to the building? Those sorts of questions. And so in that context, I think it can be kind of obvious maybe how does the place you are or live impact this decision? But I think what's really cool about this is that it really, even in context like what we've been talking about in this whole series about how do we make decisions about our programming, that place is really important to those also. And so that could be the physical place. It could be about sort of the systems and structures that are around us. And so there's kind of a lot of depth in there. And so in the framework that Libby pasted into the chat, there's sort of more of a deeper dive into all of these than I'm going to be able to do. But that just hopefully gives a little bit of context. And then number 4, how does the natural world impact this decision? And how is the natural world impacted by this decision? I love this one. I find myself thinking about this all the time now. And so just encourages us to think about in a different way, maybe the decisions that we're making and how we're not making decisions independent from other parts of our environment. Number 5, what options are you considering? Why would this be the best decision to make? And so when we have multiple perspectives involved, that sort of broadens the range of options that we might be considering. And so in this step, in this dimension of ethical deliberation and decision-making, we're thinking about what are those different perspectives that are represented in the options that we're considering, and then why might we be thinking that one of these decisions is the best one to make. Number 6, who will be impacted by the decision and how, both human and more than human, which could be things like trees or animals. And so often the decisions that we make, even about things at the outdoor school program that maybe we don't think of as being about the sort of quote unquote nature parts of outdoor school, really can have a lot of impacts. And so thinking about like food, the conversation that was happening about menus before, and the ways that students are interacting with food and the ways that food connects us to land. So there's all of these different implications and ways that we can think about things at different levels. And then number 7, how will the decision impact you, your students, and their families in the future? How will it impact more than human communities? So one of the things that's both amazing and daunting, I would say, about learning in places is that they embrace complexity. And so it's not just initial impacts, right? But how do we think about sort of the cascade of impacts that could happen if we take this particular decision? So, and some of that actually was coming out to use the food again, like if we make this decision to share the menus more publicly, how do we anticipate these cascades of impacts to happen in this particular context with this particular decision that we're trying to make? And then there's these 2 concentric circles around the outside. One is one that I think is very familiar from this series about what data and evidence was informing your thinking, right? It doesn't have to be a survey, but it could be. But what are all of the different pieces of information or ways of thinking that we're using to help us make this decision? And then the sort of bluish teal one on the outside is, how does power and historicity shape this decision? And historicity is kind of like cultural perceptions of the past. So it's not just the facts, it's not just facts about what happened, but like, what are the different ways that our position sort of affects what we consider to be knowledge, what we observe, what we know. And I thought actually we were in a professional learning with Dr. Bang a week or so ago, and I thought she gave a really interesting example of how this like power and historicity can show up in different decisions, because there was a participant who was sharing, sort of as someone whose first language is not English, like what some of the struggles are of navigating in school systems in this place where English is the language. And Dr. Bang, I think, was sort of basically said, like, English is not the language of this place, right? Like, my children should actually be going to a school where they can hear their language, which is the original language of this place. And that sort of where we start the clock on some of these things really matters and gives a lot of power. And so there's all of these different aspects of like, how is it that we're thinking about what got us to this point in time that can really shape our decisions. So for example, with that, like that might shape the way that we make decisions about how we talk about how we support students who speak languages other than English at outdoor schools. So it's a really sort of complex framework that guides us to think about all of these different aspects of who we are, our identities, how we interact with the world, and how that can shape the decisions that we make. And this also kind of relates to, Libby, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Something from, so we've used the North American Association for Environmental Education EEVAL project throughout the season this year, throughout the sessions this season. And one of the questions in the quality redefined value kind of hits on a lot of similar ideas as the Learning in Places framework that I showed on the last slide. And that question is, what are some political, social, historical, cultural, or ethical factors that are relevant to your organization and project partners? And so, like, there's a lot of this that is sort of relevant to the decisions that we make at Outdoor School. They're both sort of resources, the EEVAL resources and the Learning in Places framework, for sort of slowing down to reflect on the decisions that we're making and the potential impacts of those decisions. And so as we move forward into this session of doing some thinking about action planning and what it looks like to make change, we want to try to keep these two sort of converging frameworks in mind. And so I'm going to pass it to Stephen, see if you have anything you want to add about EEVAL and or to take us from there.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. I think you named it well. You know, if our values underline our decisions, we need to really kind of hold them. And so eval articulates 5 values, and this reflection question comes from it. I will also name that if you decide to use a different action planning framework, eval also offers kind of a like process-based way through evaluation, and there are 2 of those process areas. I'm going to plop them into the chat right now. Not to, we're not going to unpack these, but I just want to name them that we're modeling one way to do evaluation that's embedded in um, culturally responsive values. And there's other ways, right? As Christy just outlined a frame, and here's another one. So with that, I'm going to point towards what we're going to do today, and you can go forward. So for those of you who participated in season 1, you might remember this thing called the data collection plan worksheet. And we built this kind of worksheet to scaffold your data collection, data analysis. I don't know if we got past analysis, but we did that in season 1. And it was kind of a through line between all of the sessions. And we dropped it. And we dropped it because we got some feedback on session 1 that said the asynchronous work that we were doing, something kind of like homework, was not working for folks. And so we heard that and said, okay. And we had mainly seen this workbook or this worksheet as something to be done at home asynchronously. So we dropped it, right? We kind of conflated asynchronous with this this scaffolded process of helping you do your evaluation planning. So we really kind of failed to see it as its importance in a through line for everyone, really trying to conceptualize and implement an evaluation system in their program, which is really what we're ultimately trying to do here. And that's like our big kind of umbrella outcome. And so I say that because we practiced, right, a decision that was based in some evaluation. We dropped it. And then we looked at it a little bit more carefully and said, oops, what we heard was folks didn't want asynchronous, but we realized the necessity for scaffolding evaluation planning. And so it's been rebranded, and it's now known as the Evaluation Project Plan and Workbook. It's bigger, and we're going to introduce just a section of it to ultimately give you all as a tool. And who knows how we'll use it maybe in season 3 or not. No promises, but I think
Can I just add too that like on our team, Deborah, Stephen, and I have been working on this project where we were using the data collection plan worksheet as we created it from season 1. And then it just kind of ended. We're like, but we've been going through the continuation of this process in season 2, and like our tool just ended, and that sort of in part helped inspire us to be like, why did we stop using this tool? And then we're like, oh, because people were saying that they didn't want to do it as homework, and so maybe we took the wrong meaning from that. So just adding that anecdote.
Yeah, so we're trying to share that with you just to kind of peel back the curtain on making a decision, right? Oops, not exactly right, and adjusting, right? And that's what evaluation's about.